I'm so excited to have you on the show today, Dr. Carrie. Let's just jump in and how about you introduce yourself to our listeners?
Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Carrie. I am fondly known as the sensible psychologist because I bring actionable tips, tricks, and tactics from the psychology world to help you make your life feel more enjoyable. And I practice them myself because I think everybody should have an enjoyable life.
I'm with you on that. That is exactly what I do too. I learn all these things, I try them out on myself, and then I share what works with everyone else because the world needs more of this, right?
Exactly.
All right. So tell me kind of about the work you do and the impact you're trying to make on the world and why it's so important and needed right now. I think that's the key. Like, why is this so important at this moment in time?
Well, the work that I do is it's grounded in what's called psychological flexibility, which is all about working with the reality you have and figuring out what your options are and then how you move forward. And why I find this particularly important right now is in the last, I was trying to figure this out yesterday, 6 years ish, 8 years, I don't know, 6 years, I'll go with 6 years. We have, as a culture, particularly in the United States, just dropped into systematic victim mode. Life is happening to me. I need you to behave a certain way for me to feel comfortable, except for I'm not going to tell you what that is. I'm just going to get really angry, right? Like, and that lack of both personal responsibility and that lack of agency, right? Like the problem with not taking responsibility for yourself is that it inherently means that then you feel powerless. And I don't know about you, but feeling powerless feels terrible.
Yeah.
So it's working with that reality that you do have, which on some days you're going to be pretty psyched, right? Like you're going to have things are working, they're moving in your direction. And other days you'll be delivered a day or something is going on in your world that's really hard. And also, I think one of the mistakes that we've made, again, in the past, this is probably a little longer, but I think that we have started telling people that if they just think themselves, strong enough, they're going to manifest a problem-free life. And the problem with that is it's just patently untrue. And as a result, then you're really unprepared when problems do come up. And then you also feel like somehow it's my fault. Somehow I like asked for my mom to get sick or my, partner to leave me or my kid to be acting out or, my business to not be going in the direction I want it to be. Fill in the blank. And with psychological flexibility, it's like, okay, here's what's real. Here's maybe how I contributed. Here's something that came in that was a surprise that was out of my control. And now the question is, what do I want to do about it?
Mm-hmm. So yeah, no, I love that. I had never considered the broad sweeping notion that we have turned into this mentality culturally of collective victimhood. Yeah. That is such a good way of framing that because it's like I see it a lot. It's almost like we feel like we've been stripped of our agency and we have no power. And so life just happens to us all the time. Yep. And I work with this a lot with my kids in particular because it's all they know, right? Is that last 6 to 8 years. My kids are younger and it's, my response that I try to always have is, okay, what are we going to do about it? Uh-huh. Right? Like I do that to myself too. Okay, this happened. I'm not just going to sit and this happen. It's okay. What am I going to do about it? Right. Yeah. What is that next step? Reminding myself, I'm really just trying to train my brain to remind myself constantly, I always have a choice in the matter and I get to decide what to do with whatever is happening in my current reality.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So I'm going to plug something really quick for you is I'm going to plug, she has this wonderful book, Self-Help on the Go. And it gives what she's talking about, those really actionable steps for here's what's happening in life, right? And here's something you can do to actually address it, move forward, work through it. You want to share a little about that really quick?
Absolutely. So this is the book my clients asked me to write because they would come in very generously and say, here, I'm giving you this 250-page book on anger management. You can give it to someone else. It's just, can we just have a conversation today about what to do the next time my boss is a jerk?
Right.
I don't want to read 200 pages about the etiology of anger, right?
Right.
And so my book is self-help on the go, and it's literally like open it up. Each tip is its own contained couple of pages, and then you can close it and move on with your day.
And open it so you can see. So like what's happening, and then over on this side is like, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. So it describes the issue and gives you, again, some ideas about how to handle it, how to field it. So, so that you can get some power back.
Well, that's what I was going to say. What I love about it is it speaks exactly to what you were setting up there, is that it reminds us that we have the agency, we have the ability and the power to own our lives, to own what happens or what we do with what happens in our world.
Yeah.
Okay. I love this. I do love the context that you had around where we're at societally around this. And so I want to step into my favorite conversation with folks, which is, how do we design a world, or what is that future vision when we all claim that power that we have, when we all take responsibility for our lives and how we react to the present moment? Well,
personally, I think we start with what our values are. I'm sort of claiming that word back, right? Like, what your values are is it's just a way of describing what's important to you. And if I think about what some of my top values are: freedom, adventure, I really like novelty, kindness, right? Like, those are all values that have been important to me for a long time. Like, if I look back through my life, those have probably been important to me my whole life. So this is a piece of why freedom is a piece of why I've been in business for myself for 23 years, right? Adventure is why I do things like on Sundays, even if it's a small adventure of what different thing am I going to cook this week? I try to cook something different, right? And kindness is what I believe my best self is when I'm being kind, both to myself and to others. And so this creating a life that is meaningful to you is my number one priority when clients come in. And that's the question: what's meaningful to you? And then what would you like to go and do about it, right? And where do you have tendencies to kind of sabotage yourself, or maybe indulge in habits that aren't the best? And where do you have gifts from the world that you can use, and where do you have challenges from the world that you're going to have to work around, right? And that designing a life that's important to you, I think, is a great place to start. Yeah, I love that. And it ties so much into the science of positive psychology and the science of happiness, and even those values that you shared that are yours, do. Like, it's interesting because one of my values that I pick every time is adventure, right? Yeah. Oh, good. And I think, it goes to the, you said the novelty, it goes to the dopamine hits when we're at the edge and exploring new things, right? That's why it rewards us for stepping at the edge of that comfort zone. So we're all going to have different values, though. So how do we collectively as a society, if we're all being guided by different value sets, how do we better connect and integrate with one another? Well, I think the bridge there is actually curiosity. So if I'm curious about what your values are, and I can ask questions about that, that's very different than me being in judgment. My values are good, your values are bad, right? Now, I think sometimes we can come to some collective agreement that somebody who's mean on purpose, right? This was one of my rules in my house for my daughter when she was growing up, was like, don't be mean on purpose, right? Like, and accidents happen, and that's fine. If you did something on purpose because you're mad, then we're going to have a different conversation than if you drop something on accident, right? And that's okay, and both of them are okay, but it's that notion of curiosity, flexibility, and also being willing to give other people the room to be themselves. And that obviously stops, right? If your desire to be yourself wants to actively hurt me, then yeah, we're going to have a difficult time. But what we're doing a lot these days in our society is we're assuming that if anyone thinks differently, that means that that's actually that means that you're out to hurt me. And I think that we're forgetting to put a step in there of curiosity of like, what's really going on? How do you really feel about that?
Right.
And particularly with some of the political divisiveness, when you go and you actually look at polls, this is going to shock some people, but the majority of Americans agree on even really big issues. They pretty much agree on sensible, moderate kind of solutions to even really big issues. And we're getting just sort of dragged around by people on the far ends of things. And I would encourage us to, number one, get more curious, and number two, resist just getting dragged around, right? Yeah. Just because someone has said something doesn't necessarily mean it's true. Slow down. Ask some questions.
Well, and I think that's a really important piece of what you're saying and the work you do is we have to understand our values, but we also have to take a moment to pause and reflect and say, what is reality right now?
Yes.
What is true and what is someone's opinion or thought, or what is conjured up in my head, right? What is my narrative versus what is reality?
Or what have we been essentially groomed to believe, right? Like one of the things that I miss about newspapers, I'll be dating myself here because I used to read the newspaper. But one of the things that I missed about newspapers was that there would be a variety of things that you had an option to choose. And you got to wake up in the morning and some days you'd only read the funnies. Some days you would actually read the op-ed piece from somebody who you definitely didn't agree with, right? Like, but you had the option to take a look at all of it. And now with the algorithms, let's say you're interested in, a friend of mine's running a retreat in Italy coming up in November. Let's say you want to look at Italy. All of a sudden the algorithm will be like, oh, you're interested in Italy. And then you will just get Italy. But maybe you were also looking to go to the Grand Canyon. You'll get nothing on the Grand Canyon because the algorithm doesn't know that. And then you have less choice, and then you have less agency. So a piece of what I'm encouraging folks to do is to systematically take back agency, not just in like waking up in the morning and trying to choose good things for yourself, but also waking up in the morning and understanding that when you're being manipulated, it's actually good to slow down and again, ask more questions. Where did this information come from? What do I want to do with this information? And how do I broaden or get a different perspective?
Yeah. I love that because in my head, I'm going, like, I'm seeing the difference. That was a great example of how we used to interact with newspaper and news and how we don't so much interact with it now, right? It's more passive. Like it just comes.
Right? It's delivered to us. And that I feel like is really dangerous. I want to be a little bit more in charge of my thinking than that.
Yeah. No, there's so much like spinning in my head now around that. Like, where am I active and where am I passive? And I do like when I teach happiness and when I teach my classes and when I work with leaders, it is all about the reminder that happiness is an action. It requires us, right, to have that agency, to make decisions on our own behalf and to not be passive in our own lives. Because if happiness is an action, then the opposite of happiness actually isn't sadness, it's complacency. And that's like that's the algorithm working for us. We're not actively making those decisions, or we're not realizing we're not even actively making a lot of decisions.
Right. And I think we're also, I'll frequently hear someone say something like, well, once I'm motivated to do that, that's going to be great. Motivation comes at the end of action or sort of in the middle of action. It does not predate action. And so we have this idea that when we feel better, then we'll be able to do something. And it's interesting because really you have to do things when you don't feel motivated. And that's difficult to do. So that's where we talk a lot about the science of setting yourself up with habits so that it decreases that, need to lean on motivation.
Yeah, no, I love that. And you're right. Like it is the actions what gets your brain to respond and the chemicals and all of that, which allows you to go, oh, that wasn't so bad, and take the next step and take the next step. And that's that. I mean, that's how our brains work, and we don't necessarily understand that that's going on behind the scenes.
Exactly.
Right. Okay. So how do people get a better idea and understanding of what their values and that internal compass is?
So I think you can start by asking the question, what's important to me? Right. And sometimes some of those answers will be easy, right? Like you look around and you love your dog and it's like, oh, I love animals and I want to help take care of animals, right? So that's important to me. Great. That's pretty easy. It can be harder when you feel just sort of overwhelmed by all of the to-dos of life to slow down and think about like what's actually important to me. Like how do I have time to do that when I don't know that I have time to go to the grocery store, right?
Right.
But my guess is that, or actually not my guess, my encouragement is for you to look back and take a look at, when do you get angry? When do you feel happy? What are the things that if someone puts two options in front of you, you're like, oh, I totally want to do that, right? Oh, I don't want to do that. That will give you a sense of what your values are. And then there's a ton of value lists online if you go online. And if your listeners would like me to send them mine, I'm very happy to send you. I have a whole worksheet on it. They can just email me directly and I will send it off. But it's that notion of slowing down and understanding what's important to me. And then also one of the things that I encourage is, and what's important to you in this discrete time period? Like, is there a focus for the month? Is there a focus for the week? Is there a focus for this year? Is there a focus for a certain time period? And then that can kind of become your North Star of like, and this is the thing that I'm going to spend the most time and energy making sure is prioritized in my life. And that's a great thing to kind of continually reassess. And some will be foundational, right? Like kindness, I think, has been a foundational value for me pretty much forever. Some years adventure is more important. Other years security is more important. So it's deciding what's important generally, and then what's important in a certain time period.
So I love that. And I love the phasing of it, or the making a time container around it, because I do think sometimes we cling to a version of ourselves and our story and what we believe from 20 years ago that really isn't relevant as much today. So I do think it's really important to do that reflection piece constantly and go, what matters most right now?
Yeah. And it doesn't take that long. Like the thing about everything that we're talking about is these are small conversations to have with yourself on a more regular basis. You don't need to go to some, amazing, super expensive Buddhist retreat to figure this out. You can actually take a Tuesday and just be like, well, I'm going to spend 20 minutes today just kind of checking in. What's going well? What's not going well? And, if my top value is X, am I behaving in ways that would make that obvious to myself and to other people?
Yeah.
What
do you, because I agree. And in my experience and with clients, like it isn't a huge undertaking to do this. And yet we don't prioritize or make time for it or do it. So like, what do you think is keeping us societally, keeping folks from doing that reflection and understanding that 20 minutes a week is going to allow me to better align myself with my values and show up authentically? And
I think some of this is basic brain science, right? Like it's easier we have sort of faster, we don't necessarily have fast twitch muscles in our brain, but we can sort of have a faster response to what we want in the moment, right?
Right.
And
right.
so sometimes we have to slow down and set up our lives. One of the things I talk a lot about is what I call choice architecture. Mm-hmm. So a while back, I was looking at my nutrition and I was like, I'm eating like a bad kindergartner, right? Like, when was the last time I had 5 vegetables? I don't know. Last week, the whole week. And what am I snacking on? Oh, I'm snacking on chocolate covered almonds, which, while delicious, are not actually supposed to be the snack you're supposed to be leaning on if you're not actually eating any vegetables. And so I needed to set up my environment better. Right. So that meant that the chocolate covered almonds are in my cupboard at my house. Mm-hmm. And I take them when I go hiking or do something like that, because that's a great time to have them, or if I want dessert. But on my desk, I have an open container of raspberries. Yeah. Right. So that choice architecture. So this is a piece of why I'm encouraging the 20 minutes on a Tuesday is slow down and do an assessment. This is different than judgment. Oh, I'm so bad. I never do this. I'm so terrible. Like, yeah, that's not very helpful. An assessment is like, well, here's where I'm doing well. And like, oh, snap, here's where I'm regularly not doing very well. And then once you've done that assessment, then you have the ability to design, that's the architecture point, of design so that you have choices that are more deliberate. So it's moving away from the unconscious, it's moving away from the short-term gratification, and you're literally setting yourself up to be able to be closer to that life that you want to live, right?
To make
That's
better choices.
Yeah.
No, and what I love about that too is there's all this new research that's come about, and this new way of thinking about, not everything is black and white. Not everything is good and bad.
Most things aren't.
Right? And even the notion that the goal is to be happy is not actually the goal, right? Mm-hmm. It's to create more happiness, or it's to make better decisions, right? Yep. Knowing that sometimes we're going to fail. We're humans. Like, sometimes we're going to go into the fault rate.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Yeah.
But what you're saying is when we spend just a little time reflecting, then we can set ourselves up to make the decisions we want to be making easier.
And you can also work around obstacles. Like, I was gone. I was visiting my parents over the weekend in Virginia. I flew back in on Monday morning. Now, Jess, did I have time to go to the grocery store? No, I did not. Right? Like, I left the airport and I went and I had clients that afternoon. So I grabbed some lunch on the fly and took a few minutes to say hi to my husband and went to work. And the interesting thing is it's now Wednesday, right? I still haven't had time to go to the grocery store. Technically, I had time last night. The place I wanted to go closed at 7, and I probably could have gotten there at like 6:40. But it was like 7 degrees outside and snowing, and I was like, I'm going home.
Yeah, right? Yeah. Right.
So, but the point of this story is to say that because I've been doing that choice architecture, I have a few things in my pantry or a few things in my freezer so that I can still make good-ish choices. Now, are they great choices? Definitely not. Are they good-ish choices? Yeah. Is that better than terrible choices? Any day of the week and twice on Sunday. So it's that notion of being flexible enough to then also work around obstacles. I wasn't predicting it was going to be 7 degrees simply because I hadn't looked comprehensively at the weather. But it is winter in Denver. It's going to do this thing. But it's good-ish choices so that then you have kind of a system of choices that actually, again, even when you are in a place where it's like, I got nothing, I'm going to be eating takeout all week. Okay. Now, how do you order better takeout? How do you take better care of yourself? What might that look like?
Yeah.
And so yesterday it looked like me sleeping in a little bit instead of getting up and rushing. Last night, it looked like me getting home because it was super snowy and super dark and super cold. And I was just and that was fine. But so it's then where you start looking at like, well, I have these choices on the board, but I kind of need to do this. And then you can adjust as needed. And then again, that's that psychological flexibility. Hey, given these circumstances, I'm going to choose this. Under the best circumstances, I might choose that. Does this make sense?
I love it. I love the goodish. That is great framing. And I love, because life is all, I mean, it's a scale. It's always a scale of decisions. Yeah. And we have agency over where we're going to fall on that scale.
Yeah.
The flexibility of it is really important, because I was working with this woman who, she had been laid off, and it was hitting her hard.
Yeah.
And she came out, we were working together on, okay, what is our next step? What do we actually want to do? All of those big questions. And what do we want to do on a day-to-day basis to kind of step into that new future? Yep. And she came back to me with, well, I came up with a system. People are so like, their wisdom is so good. But she came up with this system where she had 2 separate to-do lists for her like day in terms of actions that she was going to take. And because she was battling some depression, there was a lot of heaviness around where she was at in her life. She had a to-do list for the days where I wake up feeling good and motivated, and a separate one for the days where it felt a little heavier and harder. So she still had actions that worked in her favor over here. Like that's that choice architecture, right? She had the actions for both scenarios, knowing that both those days were going to come.
Right. And some days she's going to wake up in a better space than others. And instead of just, again, this is the difference between assessment and judgment. Instead of waking up and being super crummy to yourself, it's like, oh, it's one of those days. Oh, well, I'm going to go with list number 2.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't seem like that huge of a thing, but she had proactively set herself up for success on both types of days, to be motivated on both types of days. And that, I mean, that's what you're talking about with having the right snacks, or not even right snacks that better fit what you want.
Yeah.
Right. Having those more accessible.
Yep.
It doesn't mean we're not going to go find the chocolate covered almonds, which are in my kitchen cabinet. Right.
They are delicious. Yeah.
But I'm just not going to have setting ourselves up to make. I know. I love almonds. It means knowing we have the power.
Yes.
To make the decisions that are in alignment with our dreams and visions and goals and how we want to show up in the world.
Yeah. And the way that you get to the big dream is all of these little steps. I think, again, if we go all the way back to the beginning conversation, in our society, we have now kind of done a lot of romanticizing the big hit, the big winner, right? Yeah. But in almost every case, if you take a look at the big winner, they have been working their butt off for a long time. And they have put together all of these little small things. And then all of a sudden, they have the overnight success 10 years after doing all of these little things. So it's like, if you want to get here 10 years from now, or 5 years from now, or even by the end of this year, what are all of the little things that are going to get you there? Because you're not going to wake up and arrive. You have to like the process too.
Right. And part of the unfortunate thing about that too is we don't share a lot of that process and the hard little steps that we take every single day. So when you sign on to whatever platform or social media you do, you see those huge wins a lot more than you see the daily steps, which is where we have the control.
Yeah.
Is in those small actions.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So since you brought us back to the beginning, I think this is great. What are some small steps our listeners can take that will allow them to start reclaiming that power and stepping out of that life is happening to me and into I have agency and power in this moment?
Well, it's understanding that when you are asking the question, why me? it inherently means that you're in victim mode. Now, everybody ends up in victim mode. I teach about this. I end up in victim mode sometimes, right? Like, it's okay to be in victim mode.
Right.
The trick is to get out of it as quickly as possible without either asking for a rescue or bullying yourself. And so one of the easiest things to do is to shift that question from why me to what's my next best move. Right? So why me? Something bad's happened. That really stinks. I'm really sorry. And deep breath. What's your next best move? Especially when you feel like you don't have any options. What's the smallest thing you can do that gets you one step towards getting out of that scenario? But your step, your action, not waiting for a rescue from someone outside.
I love that. It seems so simple, but it has so much power in shifting to that, because the next best step can be really, really small.
Yep.
It can also happen in any situation you find yourself in, right? There is always a next best step. It's the stopping and framing your current reality, your truth, in that empowering what's the next best step.
And occasionally the next best move is actually just to wait and be kind to yourself. Most of the time, much of the time, the next best move is to either do something for yourself or to do something to move yourself forward. But occasionally your next best move is like, okay, I'm just going to sit and hang out for a minute until I'm a little bit more clear. That's okay too. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. I love it. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your insights and wisdom and light and gift with our listeners. I know I am walking away with some new perspective on things. I know our listeners will be too. So thank you for your time today, Dr. Carrie.
Thank you, Jess. This was awesome.